لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسوله الكريم وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد. Continuing our lessons on Usul Fiqh, last week we spoke about the issue of at-taklif, and we explained what it means when somebody is called a mukallaf, legally responsible in the Sharia, and the shurut, the conditions of that, and then also the mawani', the preventatives of it. And so the way to we can conceptualize so far what we've done, we know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He's the legislator. So He's the one who's going to legislate the rules. And then that which He legislates or He addresses us with, that is the actions that we're supposed to do or not do. And then the individual who's being addressed or legislated towards, that's the mukallaf. So sometimes the ulama, when they talk about it, they talk about the hakim, the one who's passing judgment, wal mahkum, and the one who's being judged, wal mahkum bihi, and the one who's what is being judged with or what's being given, or mukallif, wal mukallaf bihi. All of this is just supposed to let you know right now the discussion is, we covered so far, who is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala addressing with the commands and the prohibitions. So we did that last week. So a person who's mukallaf, he's the one who's supposed to do what Allah is telling him. So we said last week, what are the conditions? Anyone can remind us of a taklif? So obviously it applies to the Muslim as opposed to the kafir, as we mentioned last week. Why we put that there? Baligh, it has to reach the age of puberty. Aqil, it has to have sanity. So fahm, it has to have the understanding of the khitab. He can understand Allah's address. Qudra, the person has the capacity to do what Allah is telling him. Wal ikhtiyar, and the person is willing, he has willingness and choice. If something of those are missing, you fall into then the issues of someone's being prevented. So examples, the preventatives you mentioned, sighar, being too young, underneath the age of puberty, or even underneath the age of tamyiz, or jahal, ignorance, or an-nasi, the one who forgot, like that. So these mawani' preventatives are to preventing someone from taklif. So if someone is not mukallaf at the moment, there's no wajib or haram on him because he's not there, like an insane person. But once the person is called mukallaf, then they have to do what Allah is telling them, which leads us now to ahkam al-taklifiyya. So today we move on to the next part. Now that we know what taklif and mukallaf means, today's discussion, al-hukm al-taklifi. What are the legislative rulings Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has legislated on the servants? And so these are the ones that we're all familiar with when we hear about something is wajib or ijab or mustahab, like these kinds of things. So this is where we're going. So first we have to remind ourselves of what it means to say al-hukm or ahkam al-taklifiyya. What does that mean? It means the address of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, khitabullahi, the address of Allah, al-muta'alliqu, which is associated or connected with bi-af'al al-mukallafin, that is addressing the actions of the mukallafin, the people who are legally responsible. And then it tells us, we're going to see, it has to do with certain actions. And we're going to see later what are those. Right? But right now we have this much. The actions, the address of Allah, khitabullahi, Allah's address towards al-muta'alliqu, which is connected to what? بِأَفْعَالِ الْمُكَلِّفِينَ, the actions of the people who are legally responsible. We talked about last week who those people are. And what is Allah commanding them with? على جهة, we say جهة الاقتضاء والتخيير والوضع, and we're going to get to it. So it has to do with commanding and prohibiting. And sometimes giving them choice. طيب. So if أحكام التكليف or حكم التكليف has to do with the people's actions, the first thing we're going to see is that when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala addresses the servants with a command or a prohibition, it's addressed to the person who's legally responsible. We already saw last week the Muslim who's baligh, aqil, Qaadir, right? He has mukhtar, etc., etc. In terms of his actions or her actions. And what Allah is going to address them with is either a command to do something or leave something off. Okay, that's one. It's going to be al-iqtida, the ulama use this terminology, which means you got to do it or don't do it. Or bit-takhir, choice. You can do it if you want, or you don't have to do it if you don't want. So we're going to see this. So the commands, the first one, al-iqtida, Allah's telling you do it or don't do it. Or recommend to do it, dislike to do it. So these are the ones that most of us are familiar with. So Allah's telling us something. Either talab or tarak, do or don't do. Then takhir. Takhir has to do with ibaha. You're allowed to do if you want. You don't have to do if you don't want. And the third one, al-wada'. Ahkam wad'iyya, we already did. If you did, this is the outcome. If you didn't do, this is the outcome. This is a sign for this is a sign for that. So therefore, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving us the hukum, He's giving us a hukum. It's either going to be al-iqtida wa takhir wada', which is either do something, don't do something, or you have a choice to do something, or here's a sign for something. But ahkam al-taklifiyya takes out the wad'iyya part. Remove that. So it's all going to be what Allah tells you to. You can do something, you have to do it, or you don't have to do it, or you have a choice to do it. Which leaves us then with 5 rulings. Right? It's going to leave us with 5 rulings. Because if Allah is commanding us to do something, it's going to be either wajib or mustahab. If Allah is telling us you have a choice to do something, it's going to be mubah, permissible. Allah is saying stay away from something, it's going to be either makruh or haram. Clear? So that's why it's taklifi. Allah is going to tell you, do it. If He's commanding us, it's wajib or mustahab. Because you can't say something is mustahab illa bidilil. You have to have dalil, you have to have proof. Allah commanded us to do it or recommended it, as we'll see. And Allah then, some rulings are to do with takhir. You have a choice. For example, when you go to the washroom, you can do al-istinja or istijmar. You can do dry cleaning or use water. You have a choice. Allah's Messenger showed us takhir, your choice. That's an example of a command which is open to your choice. And then there is the one where He commands you to stay away from something, which is going to be either makruh or haram. So now we understand how the ulama then are going to look at these issues. We're going to look at the Quran and Sunnah, the statements of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the statements of Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, His approvals, His actions. We're going to see later all the evidences. Looking for what? The commandments, or that which entails commandment. The prohibitions, or that which entails prohibitions. Or permissibility, that which entails it. That's what we're looking for. That's what the Usuli is going to finish the rules with. That's what he's trying to conclude with. This action is halal. This one is mubah. This one is mustahab. This one is haram. And how they got there. Right now we're just talking about the rulings. We didn't get to that how yet. So you have to understand then hukm ahkam taklifiyya, the most important part of usul al-fiqh. And as we keep going, we're going to see how important they are in trying to establish the knowledge or the rulings. With that being said, the ulama then say there are 5 rulings. Ahkam taklifiyya are 5. And the way in which the scholars describe it, it has to do with either the address of Allah or the ruling on the action. So if the hukum or ruling is what Allah addressed, then there's one way of describing it. And when you're describing the actions ruling, it's another way of describing it. Example, if Allah makes something wajib, we call it al-ijab. Allah obligated it, al-ijab, because that's Allah's action. Allah is obligating. The thing Allah obligated is called wajib. See the difference? That's the only difference. So when you say something is wajib, what are you talking about? The action that a person has to do. As for Allah, He made ijab of it. He obligated it. Same thing. An-nadab means Allah said permissible. The action becomes mandub or mustahab. I like this. So for our benefits, we're going to use the second one because most of us are familiar with that language. So then we're going to left with 5 rulings. Number one, al-wajib, an action which is wajib, which we're going to see what that means. Number two, an action which is mustahab, or you can call it mandub, or you can call it sunnah. There's many names for it. Number three, an action which is mubah, permissible. And you can call it, so anything around that, mubah or jaiz, all these words. Number three, makruh, something which is disliked. And then number five, something which is muharram, it's prohibited. Or mahdhur, muharram or mahdhur, or anything around those lines. And this is to do with what? Af'al. Okay, remember that, af'al, the actions of the servant. Right? So, for example, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us pork is haram, what does He mean by that? Eating pork is haram. Okay, pay attention to that. We're going to get to that later. Eating pork is haram. Right? Because that's a fi'l of the mukallaf. Right? So that's going to come later handy. To af'al we're talking about. Hitting somebody is haram. Praying salah is wajib. This kind of language. So af'al, always. Af'al are a statement and actions. So the ahkam, then the rulings we're going to give to things for sharia are the ahkam taklifiyya. When you ask someone what's the hukum on something, hukum taklifi. That's what he's asking you. What's the ruling on this? Halal means mubah. Wajib means like this. So these are what they're asking you. طيب. Once that being understood, each one of these categories has categorizations. And so therefore, in order to better appreciate them, you have to go into each one of them. And the use behind this is that if somebody doesn't go through this carefully, they won't be able to appreciate the scholars when they differ or understand sabab al-khilaf, the reasons for difference of opinion. So what we're going to do, we're going to go through wajib and try to do all of it. And if we have time, we'll go mustahab like this. And each one of them, we go over them. And the reason why it's important, because it will help us to better appreciate and also understand the issue that we're studying. Especially in relation to the furu' al-fiqhi. Furu' al-fiqhiyya, the actual matters of fiqh. طيب, what is the definition of wajib? So scholars, they say, whenever you hear something's wajib, what does that mean? So linguistically, wajib just means something is saqit, something has fallen. But we're not interested in that definition right now, right? We're interested in the technical meaning. So let's just go to the technical meaning. مَا طَلَبُ الشَّرْعِ, that which the legislation has commanded, فِعْلَهُ, has commanded its performance, طَلَبًا جَازِمًا, with the request which is certain. مَا طَلَبَ الشَّرْعُ فِعْلَهُ طَلَبًا جَازِمًا, that which the legislation has required of an action to be done and has been requested jaziman, يعني with certainty. Now some of the ulama, they may have some criticism with this wording, right? But we're not going to go there. We're just going to stay with it because most ulama mention it. So anything the sharia or the shari', Allah asks us, ما طلب الشرع, or you can say ما طلب الشارع. Whatever the legislation or legislator requires you and to do فعله طلبا جازما, the key word جازما. Allah wants you to do this action with certainty. Hence you have no choice. That's called wajib. That which the sharia says you have to do it. There's no other way around it. So if you understand this, then whatever the sharia has requested of you or the legislator, Allah has ever requested of us in a way which is jazim, certain, or by way of ilzam, necessity, you have to do it. Then it becomes wajib. Now someone will say, how do we know that? Well, we're going to get to it later. Right? The wordings are going to let us know. The wordings or the evidence are going to let us know when something is wajib or not. But if you look at this definition, this will take out mustahab. Mustahab is that which Allah has requested us to do. Well, the request is, which is غير جازم, which is not certain. Or not being binding. So Allah wants us to do, but it's not binding. So you can see that wajib and mustahab, they share. They share in definition, but only one difference. One is binding, one is not. So which one is binding? Wajib. Mustahab is not binding. But the wording is telling you to do it, but it's not binding. So from here, the ulama say, when Allah requests us to do something, the ruling can only be one of two. Right? Again, it can be a third one, as we'll see. Sometimes the wording looks like a command, but it's not. But when it's a command, as a command, it's either going to be wajib or mustahab. Sometimes a word, it looks like it's wajib, but it's actually going to be mubah. And that's the part where the usuli, he comes and he figures that out. Which wording tells us what. So sometimes people, they may jump to the conclusion something says wajib, but we say, wait, we have to figure it out, we have the steps. So we're going to get to that later. What are examples of something which is wajib? Tawheed, the oneness of Allah. Salah, Hajj, Siyam, Zakat, Birr Walidain, Sidq al-Hadith, being truthful. All these things are wajib. Okay, and we're going to see later. And how do we know them? Well, all of these things Allah commanded us to do it in a way which is necessary or necessitating you have to do it. There's no way out of it. So that's the essence of what wajib means. And we're going to find out later what the wordings, which wordings necessitate wajib, which don't. So you can already sense, if you're following me right now, sometimes the difference of opinion among the ulama is on whether something is wajib or mustahab. Why? Because they're looking at the wordings and their implications, indications. طيب, the ulama say now, aqsam al-wajib. Wajib can be divided across a number of considerations. Each one of them is useful. So how many considerations are there? The scholars say you can divide wajib into at least 3 or 4 categories. 3 or 4 categories. And each of these categorizations is useful and is needed. Okay, so wajib, the same one we're looking at, can be divided into 3 or 4 categories. 3 at least, and some they can add the 4th when we talk about different things. But we'll cover at least 3. First one, wajib in consideration of its type. Wajib is of 2 types when it comes to the action itself, or in the actual essence of the action that's required. Either it's wajib mu'ayyan or wajib mukhayyar. One which is you have to do it specifically, or one you have a choice in how you do it. So that's the first categorization. Wajib mu'ayyan means Allah wants you to do a particular action specifically. Like salah, Allah wants isha salah. Specifically you pray it. And how to pray it, He told you specifically how to pray it. This is called wajib al-mu'ayyan. Specified specifically for us. Okay, and next one is the one where it's wajib al-mukhayyar. Mukhayyar means you have a choice in how you're going to perform it, but you still have to do it. Mukhayyar means you have to do it, but the way you do it is your choice. And the choice you're given is not open, but it's still limited. The best example to show that is the issue of the kafara, expiation, kafara to yameen. Right? So kafara to yameen, how many choices do you have? What are the choices? You made an oath, you're going to do something in the future, you didn't do it, what do you have to do? You have 3 choices. What are they? Feeding 10 poor people, or clothing the 10 poor people, the middle of Beb's clothing, or fasting 3 days, or you missed the first one. Tahrir raqabah, right? The first one, you jumped it. That's the first one. So it's mukhayyar. You have choice based on your ability and based on what is available to you or capacity. Freeing a slave, a believing slave, you can't do that. Feeding 10 people, poor people, or clothing them with the medium or modest clothing, or like the middle client type of clothing, you can't do that. Fast 3 days. So that's wajib mukhayyar. Wow, you have to do one of the 3, but you choose which one based on your circumstances. See the difference? Whereas Salat Isha is not a choice. Gotta pray Isha. You have to pray the way it is. So that's the first consideration. Here, it doesn't have too much impact on the difference of opinion between the ulama as much as the other ones, as we'll see. But you should know that. Because some of the Ahlul Bid'ah, they didn't accept such things as wajib mukhayyar. But then we don't consider them as usuliyun anyways, right? We don't really consider the aqwal, right? The Ahlul Bid'ah. Because they say this doesn't make sense. No, we say it does make sense. So let's move now to the second categorization. You categorize wajib now in terms of its timing. In terms of its timing. Which means wajib can be divided into 2 in relation to its time. Category 1, al-muwaqqat. Wajib, al-wajib al-muwaqqat means a wajib which has a time, it's time bound. And number two, al-wajib ghayrul muwaqqat, it's not time bound. So to give you the example, the first one, al-wajib al-muwaqqat, it's been given us time, or has been specified with a particular timing, like salah. It has a beginning and an end. Okay, so salah has beginning, dhuhr and dhuhr. Beginning asr and asr, like this. Ghayr muwaqqat, not time bound, is like freeing a slave or feeding the poor or giving expiation. You give it whenever you're able to. It's not a specific time frame. As we'll see later though, you should be hastening to do it. But you do it when you're able to, like this. So some ibadat then, which are wajib, are time bound, some are not time bound. So what's more important is the ones which are time bound. Muwaqqat. Why? Because we want to know what's the timing and how does it impact the action. Which leads us to category 1. Al-wajib al-muwaqqat divides into 2. Right? So A and B. Wajib muwaqqat, the one that has a timing, time-bound actions. Wajib, obligations, are time-bound, are 2 types. Means in terms of what kind of timing do they have. Number 1, a timing which is restricted. So they call it mudayyak. The time is restricted. And number 2, muwassa', the time is spacious. So what does this mean? If an act of worship, let's take salah, very good example. Salah is what kind of wajib? Wajib and muwaqqat, time bound. Now wajib muwaqqat means time bound. Okay, is the time spacious or is it restricted? That's the question. Whenever something is time bound, you want to ask, what kind of timing do I have? Is it restricted timing or is it spacious timing? How do you know what spacious and restricted are? The scholars, they say any action in which it's not possible to perform another one of it. Any action in which you can't do 2 or more of that same action in the same time, and the time frame given, is called mudayyak. It's restricted. So to make it easy, salah. So time dhuhr comes in to time dhuhr ends. How much dhuhr salah could you pray? I mean, you're not supposed to pray 100 times, but you could pray technically 100 dhuhrs, right? So what kind of ibadah then is it? Salah is muwassa'. Waqtuhu muwassa', is spacious because I can pray dhuhr a number of times before time ends. But an example of something which is restricted, fasting. How much fasting in Ramadan could you fast in one day? Only one. You can only do the first day of Ramadan the first day. You can't do the first day and second day. You see, and some people kind of say, why can't you? Ya Shaykh, waqtuhu mudayyak. And that's why the idea of tadakhul comes here, right? Because people always ask, can I join the niyyahs? Why are they even asking? Because some of them, they know I can't do two of them at the same time. So I'm trying to find out if I can do the 2 of them with the same niyyah. You see, now you're thinking a little bit different now. So, okay, now that's a good discussion. But fasting, you can only do one fast one day because the timing is only available for one action. You start from Fajr until the Maghrib sets. You can't do nothing else. By the time you do the second one, it's already Maghrib. There's no fasting at night. So, when something is muwassa' or mudayyak, you have to look at the Sharia to figure out the reason why it's useful. If an act of worship has a time, it's time bound. When you miss the time, what do you call it? Qada. But if an act of worship doesn't have a time bound, it's no qada. There's no qada there. It's not time bound. So if it's time bound and you miss the time, you're doing qada. If you miss the time with a reason, right, that's when you're going to do the qada, and some scholars even say that's ada. You're doing it on the right time because you have udhr. But let's say I missed it for no reason. Now we're going to get to a discussion in fiqh. The ulama, they talk about someone missed salah for no reason. Okay, how many times this question comes up? What's the discussion about? Someone didn't pray Isha until the Fajr time. Can he pray Isha again or that time? Jumhur ulama say yes. Why? Because you see, you have to make it up. The other group, minority scholars, say no, you can't. Salah, his time is muwassa', but you missed the timing, so there's no qada for you. The other group saying there is qada because anytime you miss the time of the act of worship, you have to make it up. So they're arguing on 2 levels. The timing, and the second thing they're arguing over is on the person who missed it for whatever reason, Does he have the sabab? Does he have the cause again or not? So two levels they're arguing at. But the reason why it's important is that when you hear about somebody missed the timing for salah, now you all know what they're talking about. Then, how about discussions about if an ibadah is time bound or not? What is its end time? Ulama differ. Maghrib, salatu, the Maghrib, is it muwassa' or mudayyiq? Alright, so here's a khilaf now. What did we study before? What time does Maghrib end? When the red twilight ends. So some of the scholars say that, no, Salat al-Maghrib ends when Maghrib ends. Enough time for Maghrib. After that, there's no Maghrib. You missed it. That's the Shafi'i madhab. So you got to pray as soon as possible. You missed the time for regular people can pray Maghrib, khalas, no Maghrib. You finished the time. Now you're doing what? You're doing qada. If there's qada, right? So that's where the answers are going. So we're going to say, no. Waqt Salat al-Maghrib muwassa', just like everything else. Right? You following me so far? So when you hear this terminology, now you know what they're talking about. They're arguing what is the time and whether the time is restricted or not. So whoever says Maghrib is mudayyiq, what is he saying? What does he mean? The time from Maghrib is only enough to pray one Maghrib. Because mudayyiq means enough to do one action. After that, there's no more. So if you pray Maghrib as soon as it comes in, if you miss that time, no more Maghrib. Khalas, mudayyiq, you can't do it now. The other group says muwassa'. The time of Maghrib ends until the twilight ends. The red twilight is gone, so it's muwassa'. You can pray multiple. So you can pray beginning time, end time. You have options, right? 45 to 1 hour and 15 maybe max minutes. So that's, now you can follow along the conversation when they talk about these two. Another example. Making up Ramadan, when you miss the fast for a legitimate reason. Is making up Ramadan, the waqt for qada, siyam, Ramadan, is it mudayyiq or muwassa'? What time do you have to make up the Ramadan before it's too late? Until next Ramadan. So what waqtuhu? Muwassa', tayyib. So what does that mean then? If Arafah comes and I didn't do or Shawwal comes and I didn't do my Ramadan, Jumhur ulama say you can still do Shawwal. Why? Because waqtuhu muwassa'. Now you're following it? Many ulama say no. You have to follow the hadith. Man sama Ramadan ثم اتبعه ست Shawwal. The other Jumhur say no. The qada Ramadan is muwassa'. You have the whole year until next Ramadan. Tayyib, go. That which is gonna miss, which is the 6 days, go ahead. And that's qawl sahih. Wallahu a'lam. It's qawl qawi. And that's a strong opinion. The reason why they're arguing is on the timing. The other groups are arguing on the hadith. They're using Zahir Nas and they're using the actual waqt of the fi'l. You see, if you're at this level, now you're in the conversation. Right? But you're not there, it's just like Shaykh Uthaymeen said, Ibn Baz said, Shaykh, we gotta go on, we gotta go inside. What are they saying and how are they saying it? Because if you don't, then you will never understand. Again, we said last time, the awam, tulab, ilm are different. But the benefit behind this, if you make tarjih on one over the other, let's say I say only you have to do is follow the hadith. That's a strong opinion too. You have to follow the hadith. We're fast Ramadan, you didn't do it. But the other group is saying, but you can't do that if you have 28 days. If someone has the capacity to do both, yes, they should do both. Like I miss only 2 days. 2 days Ramadan, then I do my 6 days Shawwal. No problem. If I had 28 days, then I have a problem, right? And we can never. So that's why these kinds of conversations, you can understand them. Okay, I'm following you, I'm with you. Does that make sense? So now we learn. Wajib has then two types. Time bound, not time bound. The one's time bound is either mudayyiq or muwassa', spacious or restricted. Third categorization. Wajib can be categorized in relation to the actor, the one who's doing it. Wajib al-ayni means individual obligation, or al-wajib al-kifai, the individual communal obligation. And many of us, we heard this before, right? So an action is wajib, but who has to do it? Everybody. If everybody has to do it individually, it's called wajib al-ayni, right? Which is something which is a fard ayni, sometimes a wajib ayni. And if some of us have to do it, not all of us, so if some of us do it, the rest of us are off the hook, it's called al-wajib al-kifai, or fard al-kifaya, right? The fard which is our communal. So the benefit behind that, some actions are communal responsibilities because the maslahah can be obtained communally, and some ibadat are fard ayni or wajib ayni because the maslahah can only be done, the benefit can only be achieved to each individual. Okay, salah 5 times a day, what kind of wajib is it? Ayni, because the maslahah of salah goes back to the prayer. I have to pray in the salah tanha al fahsha munkar. If you say, brother, pray for me, you did my dhuhr for me, how about I'm in ta'ban state? Right? What about my taqwa? What about my iman? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made everyone pray salah because the maslahah is there. Take for example, Amr bil Ma'ruf wa Nahy anil Munkar. What is the origin? Origin, generally, the community is Fard Kifai. Someone has to be doing it. But if they don't, then it becomes, as we'll see, it becomes Aini. No one's doing it. Da'wah. We studied it before. The Hukum Asli for Da'wah is Fard Kifai. Wajib Kifai. Someone. وَلْتَكُمْ مِنْكُمْ. From you, let there be a community calling towards good. But if nobody's doing it, it becomes then Aini. And so those who are able. And sometimes it could be Aini on one person, on another person. Maybe you're the one who knows, other people don't know it. So the reason why that's important, sometimes we check to see what kind of action is this and what's the responsibility. Some ulama, again, they differ. So some of those differences of opinion are meaningful. For example, so some of the times the scholars, they look at certain ibadat. Jum'ah Salah is Fard Aini. How about the Eid and the Kusuf and the other ones? Or the Aini or the Kifai or the Mustahab or Wajib. These are discussions the ulama they have. So the reason why it's good to know is who has to do it and who doesn't have to do it. So from all this we see that when you divide all these wajib into these categories, you will benefit from understanding how they apply to the actual fiqh itself. A principle the ulama always mention, now it has to do with that, means مَا لَا يَتِمُّ الْوَاجِبُ إِلَّا بِهِ فَهُوَ واجب. This is a principle we hear many times, it's good to remember. مَا لَا يَتِمُّ الْوَاجِبُ إِلَّا بِهِ فَهُوَ واجب. مَا لَا يَتِمُّ الْوَاجِبُ. That which can an obligation, that which is necessary for an obligation to be completed, it too becomes obligation. ما لا يتم الواجب إلا به فهو واجب. So an example would be, if my clothes are full of najasa and I have to pray salah, and I can't pray salah unless my clothes are clean, because وَثِيَابَكَ فَطَهِّرْ, cleaning my clothes becomes wajib, because salah is wajib. So these are the wasail. This is teaching us the means to wajib or wajib, the means to mustahab or mustahab, the means to haram are haram, the means to makruh are makruh, like that. So for example, Salatul Jum'ah is wajib. If I can only get to the masjid because it's so far, I can only get there by driving, and I have a car to drive, I have to drive wajib. If I can walk, same time, then I can walk, I have a choice. But I have to get there. But I can't say, oh, it's so far and I have a car and I'm just sitting there. If you have no car and it's so far, then you can't go there, then it's enough. So we're learning from this that sometimes something is wajib and some things take the ruling of wajib because they're related to that thing. So some may say, well, what's the proof for that? We're going to use the principle. مَا لَا يَتِمُّ وَاجِبِ إِلَّا بِهِ فَهُوَ wajib. The means take the same ruling as that which you are, the maqasid, the intention, or that which is intended. So this is a useful benefit, what comes later. طيب, once we understand wajib can be divided across these levels, so muayyan, mukhayyar, muwaqqat, ghayr muwaqqat, ayni, kifai. These are the categorizations. The question you get when you find something's wajib, you ask those questions. Okay, I found something's wajib. So I'm going to ask that question. What kind of wajib? Is it specific or is it choice? Is it an obligation of specification or choice? Is it one that's time-bound or not time-bound? If it's time-bound, is it spacious or fixed or restricted? Is it individual obligation or communal? So those are the questions you have to ask when you look at action which wajib. Why? Because you want the full scope of the wajib. So once we understand this, we can see that the first thing that people have to arrive to is something's wajib. Once you arrive at, next thing you're going to ask is these questions. Okay, so let's say someone tells you Salatul Jum'ah is wajib. طيب, Salatul Jum'ah is wajibah. Okay, one we're going to ask now. Okay, is it muayyan or mukhayyar? It's muayyan, right? You don't have a choice in there, right? You have a choice, right? We don't have men. I mean, talking men, not the women, right? The men. You have a choice. Muayyan. Allah wants us to pray Jum'ah. Okay. طيب, is it muwaqqat or غير muwaqqat? Muwaqqat, because if you miss the time for Jum'ah, خلاص, يعني, and we know that the time starts from the time the sun rises, the day starts all the way to the end of Dhuhr, right? Normally when Dhuhr will end. And then if it's time bound, is it muwassa' or غير muwassa'? Muwassa', I can do more than one Jum'ah. Since if I miss one Jum'ah, it's possible I can get to another one. Or if I can only go for my work, I can only reach the second Jum'ah, then I'm allowed to, because waqtu muwassa'. Just like I've got the second Jama'ah, la bas. See, the benefit behind that, it's okay. Because if you don't believe there's muwassa' and غير muwassa', you believe everything's been done awal waqt. No, you could, awal waqt, what does that mean, brothers? Earliest time from the time given, and so latter time when time given. And if you miss the time, then you're doing qada. To miss the salah means you miss the whole time. And we're going to see a principle later. That doesn't mean you just choose. Try to do earlier is better always. And lastly, ayn or kifayi. Is it communal or is it individual? Ayn, everyone has to pray Jum'ah of the men who meet the conditions, khalas. So that shows us that we can do this for every action. Now there are some useful principles connected to this that we can benefit from. One principle is that it's preferable to, when something is wajib and muwassa', when it's spacious, the wajib is spacious, it's preferable to do it في أول وقته إلا بدليل. So that's a قاعدة. الأفضل فعل الواجب الموسع في أول وقته إلا بدليل. It is preferable to do a spacious act of worship or obligation which time is spacious. It's preferable to do it in the earliest time except with proof. So if you had a choice between praying in the earliest time or later time, always preferable earlier time. Because when the Prophet ﷺ asked, what's the best good deed? As-salatu ala waqtiha. Wa fi riwayah fi awwali waqtiha. So that's why we're learning that if you have a salah is muwassa', why can't I just pray at the end of salah? I mean, you can, but you're not supposed to. Preferably, you're supposed to do an earlier time. That's a general rule. But there's sometimes proof where you can delay it. Right, that's different. Illa bidalil. But the ruling, the principles, al-afdalu, the best practice, fi'l al-wajib al-muwassa', to do the action which is time obligation, which is time is spacious, fi awwal waqtihi, in its earliest time, illa bidalil, except when there's a proof. So some may say, what are some examples for that? It's recommended to pray dhuhr in earliest time, except when it's very hot. It's too hot outside. Again, not so much in Canada, but in Saudi Arabia and the Middle East, it's so hot, 40, 50 degrees. So they may delay it a little bit to let it cool down. The hadith of Rasulullah إذا اشتد الحر فأبردوا بالصلاة. When the heat's too intense, cool down the salah. Let it get a little cooler. So that's recommendation to delay it. With Jama'ah will be a little bit later. See, that's good. Okay, Isha. وقته موسع. Is it? It's a khilaf now, leave it in there. It is موسع, but to when? Nisful layl or till Fajr, right? But in any case, okay, we're going to choose Isha time. What's the preferable? Everybody is okay with it. We're going to do it closer to the middle of the night. That's better. Because the Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam that he would do that, but he said it was difficult. But someone said, Sheikh, you guys pray 7:15. Al-Jawab, that's the answer. Why pray so early if you could do that? Because Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said if it wasn't hard for the Ummah. So Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam's practice was whatever the community is okay with. Everybody gathered, he prays Isha early. They wait, he delays it. But it's not sunnah to say we're going to all pray Isha toward 10 something, 15, everybody's asleep. Then you're going to be athim, or maybe worse, you get removed from your position. Not a good imam. Alright, so now we can see illa bidilil. That's a good benefit. طيب, another principle connected to this, and is already kind of indicated to it. If a wajib, an obligation is muwassa', it's spacious, and there is a reason, right, to specify delaying it, then we should delay it. Right? If there's a reason for it, we already covered this, but it's kind of connected to it. But he also mentions, connected to this principle, if something is there, and some reason leads us to delay the wajib muwassa' to something later, then we're allowed to delay it. Otherwise, we should go in the earlier time. So the only time you move away from the awwal waqt is when there's a udhr or the arad, a reason for it. Because the Hanafis, their madhab is that certain ibadat like the asr, you delay it. They say that's preferable. But we're saying that's not the case. It's not the case. Another thing we connected to this, if a wajib muwassa' is spacious, then we should not pray it in its earlier time if the jama'ah will be praying later time. Okay, we mentioned this before. The jama'ah in your community, if it's praying later, and we say it's preferable to go earlier, what are you supposed to do here? Because the jama'ah takes preference over the waqt. Otherwise, I'm supposed to pray earlier, but let's say I can only pray by myself earlier, or I pray the jama'ah later. I'm going to go later, because that's one of the reasons why I can move it. Okay, I have arad, I have a reason. The jama'ah is praying later, I go with the jama'ah. But if the jama'ah is praying earlier, I have to pray earlier. Same thing at work. If you can't pray earlier time, you pray later time. If the work won't allow you to pray except that time, or you got so busy. So there's, when you have a reason for it, this is when you try to delay it. Otherwise, you go with the early principle I mentioned. And that helps us to not to miss the wajib and its bounty. And that leads to the other principle we already mentioned earlier, that something, if it's wajib, is muwassa', or we gave the example, and another one is mudayyiq, and it's limited, or its waqt will end quite soon, then you give preference to the one that's time is going to end soon. So the example we gave was, I have some fasts owing Ramadan, too many of them, and the 60 days Shawwal are coming, and I can't do both. If I can do both, I'll do both. Otherwise, what I'm going to do, I'm going to give preference to the 60 days Shawwal, because the time exits faster, whereas the other one's muwassa'. So here we can see sometimes these principles, they come useful, and the ulama sometimes they differ in relation to it. طيب, with this being said then, the real consideration, and where really the debate between ulama really is at times, is what is wajib? How do you know it's wajib? Al-fadh or sigh al-wujub? And this is the point which is very important. What are the al-fadh or the sigh, the wordings of wujub? Means what are the wordings that tell us something's wajib? Because this is what we're going to be looking at, especially when we're talking about the nusus, the textual evidences, which are qawliya. Okay, we'll talk about later, but when it comes to the acts or actions or the evidence, the adillah, some of them are qawli and some of them are fi'li. Most of them we know are qawli. Nabi Sallallahu said, Allah said, right? So Imam said, statements. And sometimes evidence to actions. Nabi Sallallahu did, he didn't do. So we're going to talk about later the evidences separately. But right now we're talking about, I got a wording or a text. I want to know, does this text and this command mean wajib or mustahab? Or neither. Right? That's what we have to know. And before going there, we have to understand why this is important. Because sometimes the differing is there, but we'll see later it's not usually there. Because most of the ulama will agree that the wordings for wujub, there are many, but most of them, the common ones are known. So when you find this wording, something's wajib, ala asl. But it doesn't mean stays on wajib. You can move things from wajib to mustahab. You can move things based on other evidences. So we're going to see the real interesting part will come on the discussion of dalalat. What is the Quran and Sunnah indicating from the wordings that we all agree on, or we all have in front of us? Because not every wording looks like it's wajib means it's wajib. Or it is wajib, but something else takes away from the wajib. How do we know that? That's why the ulama are discussing often something that looks very clear cut, but it's not. But right now, all we're trying to know is, I got a wording. The first analysis, is it wajib or not? That's different. It's because it's amr, it's a command. So let's look at some of the wordings to help us, because this will give us something to work with. Some of the ulama, they say that the wordings for wajib are many. There are many. And some of them they mentioned upwards, at least about 8 or 9 most common. And Ibn Qayyim, rahimahullah, in his kitab, Bada'i al-Fawaid, he mentions a lot of this. So that's a good place to look, because he mentions it, and he talks about these wordings. And nicely, the wordings behind it. But let's talk about them one by one. The first one. Fi'l amr. Fi'l amr is a command or imperative verb in Arabic. A comparative, right, or a command form verb. وَأَقِيمُوا الصَّلَاةَ وَآتُوا الزَّكَاةَ. أَقِيمُوا الصَّلَاةَ is fi'l amr. Allah's commanding you, do it. Those of us know Arabic, how do we know that? أَقِيمُوا, آتُوا. Well, these are commands. So if Allah is commanding us with a fi'l amr, a commandment, the origin is a commandments in Arabic. So in Arabic there's past tense, present tense, future tense, and command forms. Command forms, wajib. In asl, yani, of course, that's when you see it, you know it's wajib. And we're going to take the principle, al-amr, all the commandments, whenever you find them, whatever one it is I'm talking about today, you feed al-wujub. They teach us something's obligation. So you're going to train your brain. When you see a commandment equals wajib. Fil asl, that's origin. Go later on, we're going to complicate it, but that's the first thing. Wajib is command. Command equals wajib. So Allah says, أقيموا الصلاة فعل أمر. فعل أمر يفيد الوجوب. That means do it. I mean, simplistic, but it counts. Later you're going to be like, okay, that's correct. Because we're going to look for other things to make sure that there's no other alternative meanings. Second one, and if you want a lot of this in English, Shaykh Ibn Uthaymeen, his kitab, Al-Usul min ilm al-Usul, or fi ilm al-Usul, that kitab is in English. Ibn Uthaymeen, he has all of them listed, a lot of them. So that's a good place to look if you can find the PDF even, and you can get all of them. He lists each one of them. So it's good to see them. Another example, fi'l mudari' al-majzoom bilam al-amr. So present tense verb in Arabic, which has been preceded by a lam of commandment. Okay, and becomes majzoom then. So now you can see how delicate this is. The Nahw in Arab and Usul Fiqh, they go like this. Fi'l mudari' al-majzoom, a fi'l mudari', present tense verb, that's preceded by what's called lam al-amr, the lam of commandment. And when this lam commandment comes to the fi'l mudari', it makes it majzoom. It becomes like sukoon at the end. This combination means wajib. So I'll give you an example. Surah Hajj. وَلْيَطَّوَّفُوا بِالْبَيْتِ الْعَتِيقِ. So Allah says, and circumambulate the ancient house. So Allah starts with wow and lam. That's lam al-amr, the lam of commandment. يَطَّوَّفُوا is fi'l mudari'. Why? Because there's ya before it. And the wow, it ends with wow because the noon is taken off. Right? Because we're going to see it's a command, it's going to become a command form here, become majzoom, you drop that. بِالْبَيْتِ الْعَتِيقِ. Now some of us will say they didn't get that. It's okay. But that's part of also learning Usul al-Fiqh, that some of these things we should know. Because if we don't, we wouldn't know. Now it's not even that hard, because some of this, if you study any Arabic, you know fi'l mudari', present tense verb. Lam al-amr comes before it. Then it becomes like this. وَلْيَطَّوَّفُوا بِالْبَيْتِ الْعَتِيقِ. So what we're also learning here is that when the ulama are finding out something's wajib, now you're noticing what they're doing, right? They're not always looking for the word wajib in the text. That's also one way, right? But that's not the only way. In fact, that's not probably the most common way. So for example, what's an example of that we're going to get to? But sometimes like the hadith ghusl. غسل يوم الجمعة واجب لكل محتلم, right? Sometimes we know this word. غسل of Jum'ah is wajib. It says wajib. Right? So then we say, خلاص, wajib. Yeah, that wording is not going to find a lot of the commandments like this. So we have to move away from the idea that wajib is going to say wajib, fard. No, the ulama are doing istinbat. They're looking at deriving. And that's the sharaf of our deen, brothers and sisters. Islam, we're the only ones who could do this. The Yahud, they don't have usul fiqh. They have ahkam بدون usul fiqh. And the Yahud, the Nasara, they don't have anything, right? They don't have either usul fiqh or nas, right? Because everything is mixed up. So us, when the ulama look at it, now you're wondering, how come the ulama said this? If you read now, you're seeing what they're doing. So go to the book, Ibn Uthaymeen, Usul min ilm Usul. And if you learn some of these, it's like a list, and like a formula. You find this, you find that, it equals this. But then sometimes you take it away. When you take it away, also there's a method. Everything has a method. So here Allah is telling us, go around the ancient house, the Kaaba. It's a command. A command means then, it's wajib, because that's the origin. These are the wordings of wujub. And it's true, when you go to tawaf is wajib. It's from the arkan of Hajj Umrah. Number 3, ism fi'l amr. The noun, or the verbal noun of command. Ism fi'l is fi'l amr is the noun of a command verb. So this certain category of asma called asma al-af'al. Alaykum anfusakum, upon you, is to do. The word alaykum is an example of ism fi'l. What is it telling us? Wajib. Now again, if you don't know what I'm talking about here, it doesn't mean, don't worry. Right? You go home, you're going to read what he's saying, and also allow us to build the dots between the fiqh and the nahu and other things. Ism fi'l Al-amr is the nouns which are nouns of verbal commands. Alaykum, upon you, or required of you. What's the famous hadith many of us know? Alaykum bi sunnati. What does that mean? And what is it teaching us? It's wajib to follow sunnah. You see? Someone tell you, Akhi, it's not wajib to follow sunnah. What are you going to tell him? Right? I mean, someone says that's already out of it, right? But if he tells you that, what are you going to say? Alaykum bi sunnati, and we got fi'al amr. Fi'al amr, ism fi'al amr, yufid rujub. That's the higher level, right? Most of us, we don't need to go there because when you tell someone this hadith, you already won. You have a hadith, doesn't have anything, that guy. And then you tell them what's the meaning of hadith, like this. But look at the translation then. See, the translation has to follow them. Required of you, or you must. Number 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, right? All of these are to do with the same things. They're Arabic oriented. So another one, number 4, masdar al-na'ib and fi'l amr. So it's getting more further complicated. Masdar is a verbal noun. Al-na'ib, which is taking place of fi'l amr. Right, so that's going to be hard to explain, right? If someone doesn't know this. So we're going to just mix all of them. Inshallah, those who want more, you go back to the kitab because you're going to have to see the examples and read them. And later, inshallah, after the class, we can look at some of the examples in the projector. We have to go. That's another way to own Usul Fiqh. You have to go through these examples properly. So I'm just going to read the rest of them for the sake of time. I'm going to summarize by talking about what is the goal of this. Number 5, التصريح من الشارع بلفظ الأمر. That's the easy one. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says something is commanded. إن الله يأمركم. Allah commanded you. That's the easy one, right? Allah commanded you. So Allah used the commandment. I'm commanding you to do it. That's it. إن الله يأمركم أن تؤدوا الأمانات إلى أهلها. I was commanding you to return the trust to its people. Number 6, clear wording of the word wajib or fard. Right? Or the word kataba. So, for example, we gave Jum'ah, the ghusl is wajib. MashaAllah, it's already there. Faridatan min Allah. Allah's talking about inheritance. Faridah. What's the difference between fard and wajib? No difference. Right, same thing. Kutiba alaykum as-siyam. Allah has kutiba, prescribed. What does that mean? Wajib. So any of these words which are implied its application, like commanded, wajib used, or fard is used, or kutiba is used, prescribed. Another one, any wording in Arabic, يفيد الوجوب في اللغة العرب. Any type of statements or expressions in Arabic that Arabs consider that it means wajib. So that's why sometimes we have to check what the ulama and the Arab are used to. وَلِلَّهِ عَلَى النَّاسِ حِجُّ الْبَيْتِ. Upon the people towards Allah is that they perform hajj to the house. This wording doesn't look like it's wajib, but in the Arab that means wajib. So sometimes we also have to investigate what the Arab considered is wajib or not, like in the wordings. And what's interesting about this, that one of the causes or the foundation for Usul Fiqh is Arabic language, as you can already tell by today's lesson. As Imam Shatibi rahimahullah mentioned, so when someone's Arabic is stronger, the better they are in fiqh. The more you know about Arabic, it says, the more better you are going to be in the knowledge of the deen. Whoever's knowledge says is beginner, is beginner level. Whoever is intermediate, says intermediate level. Whoever is advanced, advanced level. And number 8, the last one here, ترتيب الذم والعقاب على ترك. When there's a combination of them, blame, والعقاب, and punishment, على ترك, for leaving off something. So any wording or sentence in which there's blame as well as iqab, punishment for leaving off an action, that means it's wajib. And this is what Imam al-Qayyim others benefit us with. فَلْيَحْذَرِ الَّذِينَ يُخَالِفُونَ عَنْ أَمْرِهِ أَن تُصِيبُهُمْ فِتْنَةً. So Allah is here warning, فَلْيَحْذَرْ, beware those who oppose His command, أَن تُصِيبُهُمْ فِتْنَةً. So here they oppose the command, they did tark. So Allah is threatening them or saying that you're going to be falling into a fitna, and that's blameworthy. Which means what? Let those who oppose Rasul beware. Beware of what? A fitna. And that means it's wajib then to not oppose his sunnah. So from these categories, if you look at them, you can see some of them are easier to be identifiable than others. Maybe we'll give a few more that maybe you can find as well. Some of the ulama say that when also you look to the Quran and Sunnah, you can also see very common wordings as well. There are other wordings which are also popular that will lead us to the same points. But most of them are mentioned here. For example, words like haqq. Something is a haqq al-ibad. It's a right on the servants to do. That means it's wajib. Or al-ibad. Or it's upon them to do it. Or when you hear about an action, if you don't do it, then your action is going to be invalid. So I'll give you an example, one more. Sometimes the wording suggests that if you don't do this, the action is no longer there. لا صلاة لمن لم يقرأ بفاتحة الكتاب. There's no prayer for the one who doesn't say Fatiha. Is Fatiha wajib? Rukn? Where did you get it from? Because here it says there's no salah. So therefore, I need to pray salah, aqim salah. And if I can't pray salah, Fatiha is also wajib. It's rukn. Like Allah denied the existence of salah, the Shari, the legislation is invalid without the Fatiha. So therefore, Fatiha is wajib. Otherwise, it wouldn't say that. So from all of this, we can see there's multiple ways of figuring out if something's wajib or not. And it gets more complicated than that, but we're not going to go further. What we're going to highlight then, when we look at wordings, the job of the person who's studying Usul Fiqh is to look at a wording and look and see, does this indicate, number one, a command? And if the answer is yes, is it wajib or mustahab or otherwise? That's what you're supposed to, that's what you're training your brain to do if you're studying Usul Fiqh. Because if the ulama look at a text and everyone agrees it's wajib, then khalas, ijma'. But you're going to find they look at it and they differed. Me and you, if we're trying to study Usul Fiqh, we have to move away from that. The wordings always mean, I find one of the 8, I find one of the 9, it's wajib, khalas. No, not so fast. Because there are other evidences out there. You have to check for other evidences. So we're going to see that we're just starting. We're not completing. Because someone said, this is very easy then. I just look for these 9 and no. If it was that easy, there wouldn't be so much khilaf or ikhtilaf. Give you an example. Someone asked once, one of the brothers, what's the ruling on the ghusl al-Jum'ah? It's wajib or not? What do you guys think? Wajib? Some say yes, wajib. Jumhur ulama, what do they say? Mustahab? Why? Wajib and kulli muhtaram. You see, if fiqh is that easy, Usul fiqh is wajib, brother. That's it. The only delil using one nas. Right? That's level using. See, some of us, we forgot only one text. Where's all the texts? How about other evidences? So the other group, why did they say it's not wajib? We're going to look at another evidence. And when they looked for what? Other wordings and also other reasons. For example, Umar and Uthman, when they were discussing about the Jum'ah, ghusl, hadith Muslim, and Umar asked Uthman, do you come to Jum'ah late and you didn't do ghusl? He said, I did wudu. Umar kept quiet. I mean, Uthman's a faqih, he didn't do ghusl. So that's, ulama used to say that if it's wajib, he wouldn't have done that. Wajib means, what does wajib mean even? I'm going to finish with this. Wajib, if something's wajib, you have to do it. And if you don't do it, what happens? You're deserving of sin. You know, man gets sinful, mustahiq, you're deserving of a sin, of a punishment. But here's Uthman, Khulafa al-Rashideen, coming in the Jum'ah, no. So that's one of the evidences they use amongst others. Why am I mentioning this? Our step, where we are so far, we're just looking at the al-fadl al-wujub. We're not fuqaha yet. Right? Because we didn't look at the adillah, all of them. So we're going to see sometimes something says wajib and we're going to move it to mustahab. Using extra textual evidences or multiple evidences, or sometimes other, what we call dalalat. That's the part where we're going to see it gets very interesting. Right now, all we're doing is just figuring out commands equal wajib. We know it's a command based on these words. We know the origin is wajib. Until further, we're going to hold that. And that's what you do. The order is that when you find something's a command, you can say it's wajib. And then move it from wajib, you need some proofs. But we're not going to teach people to say if something's wajib, it could not be wajib. No, the first thing is that commands lead to wajib. One last thing, why did the ulama focus on looking at what is wajib or not wajib? We said if Allah commands something with certainty and binding, it's wajib. And if it's not certain or not without being binding, it becomes mustahab. These are commandments. Then when there's prohibitions, we have the two, which is disliked or prohibited. And sometimes we're going to have a command which is telling us it's permissible. Later we're going to see that the way that you're going to layer all these points is you're going to come up with a system, a way of thinking about these texts. So right now, the hard part is not to give up, not to fall out of the class, because some of us we're going to be lost. It's not that hard, but you also can't expect it to be too easy, because again, the faqih, it's not just a faqih. The person who's usul fiqh knows a lot of ulum, aqidah. Right? He can talk about different matters of tafsir, sharh of hadith, because that person has some of the tools, the most important of them. The more we know, the better. But we're going to see, in order to appreciate the whole thing, you have to go through the whole thing. You have to finish all the mabahith, then we summarize it. Right now, if someone goes home, he looks at, for example, Usul min ilm usul ibn Uthaymin, read the siyagh, the wordings of wajib, memorize some of them, try to commit them to memory or remember some of them. If you don't understand them, try to figure them out. And later on, they will become useful. And then you find text and try to figure out, is a hadith wajib or not? What is hadith? Where is it? Like this will help you. But if you look at the wordings now and say, oh, it's too much already. We didn't get to some of the other things which are more important. And that means that sometimes you find some people, the reason why they give up because they don't want to spend more time. It requires time. But also you will see the fruits of it are unparable, right? It's impossible, right, to compare someone who has even a little bit of this kind of knowledge to one who doesn't. Like I said before, the difference between a ami and a talib ilm, or between an alim and the one who's not, is this knowledge. Everyone can cite a hadith, but someone will say, what does the hadith mean? And so we said, for example, today we looked at some interesting things, and you have to go home and do some research. So, for example, usul min usul, or you look on different things to build that. And inshallah, we'll share also some examples of some things to practice with. For example, some hadith, you can go and check, right, the wordings or the rulings and see if it's wajib or not. And it will help you to also to develop your understanding of it. But later we're going to see that when you put the pieces together, it becomes very enjoyable. In the beginning, it's just about being sabr bi-ilm, fi ilm, just keep going. Because people, any ulum you're going to study, it's not going to be easy at the beginning. Because you have to develop and learn. And you can't just drop out every time. Because then all it means I'm not willing to work, make the effort to raise the level of knowledge. Sometimes some people say, I want to gain more knowledge. You have to have more sabr. Because some of the ulum are going to go up, going to take you somewhere. You maybe didn't know what's going on. You got to be patient, keep going. And it's not that hard. Especially if you have a good niyyah. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who opens the mind. You have to make dua. But inshallah, right now we did wajib. Mustahab is quite similar. So when we do look at those two, then we'll go to the other 5 categories. And this will help us then to cover ahkam al-taklifiyya. From then we move, the next mabhath will be the mabhath of adillah, evidences. What are the evidences? Which count, which don't? For example, today I gave the example of Uthman, what he did before the Jum'ah. He did wudu. Is that dalil or not? See, that's in the mabhath of adillah. Qawlu sahabi, one mabhath of sahabi, dalil. Right? So that's why they can even use it. We'll talk about it later. Then after that, once we know what wajib looks like, mustahab looks like, makruh, mubah, and muharram, and we know what its evidence is, then we're going to look at what the evidence indicate. Means, I know something's wajib, but what does it mean now? What kind of wajib? Or what kind of level of wajib? And other things like this. And lastly, when there's opposing views, the last one, ta'arud tarjih, which most of the khilafat al-ilm falls there. Means that there's 2 evidences, they're differing. So, Jum'ah ghusl, wajib, mustahab. So when you go to the books of the ikhtilaf, you see, okay, some of the ikhtilaf, this is what different. Here's what this one group said, this group said, this is their proof, that's their proof, this is their usul, that's their usul. So you're measuring them. And you're going to use rules to say who's right, who's wrong. But the point is, in order to get to that level, even if you can understand why they differed, you have to know what they're differing about. So sometimes even people ask, I want to know why the ulama are different, the madhabs. Some of it can be easily explained. Some of it cannot be explained without knowing what they differ over. So inshallah, step by step. So we're not going to do too much, but that's enough for today, inshallah. Anyone has any questions? Yes. So the Hanafis, they want to look at wajib and fard, they look at it from the angle either of the strength of it or the one who said it. So fard is going to be dalala is qat'i and wajib is dhanni. Or they say fard could be from the Rasul of Allah and wajib from Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But usually it's qat'i dhanni. And we're going to see later why qat'i dhanni, what does that mean even? Right? But that's what they're arguing. Something is clear cut, one is not clear cut. So but we're going to say that Jumhur Ahl Ilm, they didn't differ on that. Fard is wajib, wajib is fard. Because they're using it to interchangeably. Yes. So the hadith the brother was talking about the Sahabi who used to wake up late for Fajr, and Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, his wife complained to Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. The ulama explained that he comes from the tribe of people who they have like a genetic issue where they wake up late. So they can't wake up on time, or the second interpretation, they work at night, irrigating the land, so they do night shift, and then when they go back from work, they fall asleep, and then they wake up late. So Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam told him to pray when he wakes up, because he said we wake up when we feel the sun. So the ulama say this person is not one who is falling short, because he takes the means to wake up, but he can't. So we know ليس على النائم تفريط or لا تفريط على النائم. There's no negligence or sin on a na'im, the one who's sleeping, because we said he's not mukallaf, but he has to take the asbab. So this group, they had a genetic reason, they go to sleep when the time to sleep is allowed, which is late night, and with the asbab he can't get up except this time. So no, that's okay. But the ulama says it's not allowed for someone to sleep with no alarm, or no one's going to wake you up, and no one's going to appoint someone to do that for you, then you're sinful. So this hadith has nothing to do with that. So we know that some people who work night shift, it happens. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is considerate of that and mercy on us. But you put the alarm, you try your best. But now imagine somebody just say, I'm going to just pray, sleep, no alarm, wake up. Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam hadith of Muslim, when Bilal, he appointed Bilal to wake him up for salah. And Bilal fell asleep and they all wake up late. So Bilal was appointed, why? Because the ulama said that's how you do it. That's how you wake up for Fajr. You need some alarm. Hayya Aisha, Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam used to use the rooster. That was the alarm clock, right? So this is the problem. People who just say, I'm going to sleep. The waqt of salah came in and you know you sleep, you're going to miss the time, it's haram to sleep. But if the waqt didn't come in, you can pray sleep beforehand. It's okay. But you have to take the means. If you take the means and you sleep before time comes in, which is halal time to sleep, and you missed it, you're okay. That's what the ulama will explain. But it doesn't mean now somebody who knows himself, no one's there to wake you up, the alarm's not going to work, salah is very close, you stay awake. Or the time came in, I'm going to sleep and I have no alarm, I know I can't wake up. No, you should pray first and sleep. But that hadith is not an excuse for that. But it's for people in that category. So those who are in that category, night shift and that stuff, they can fall into that. If they take the means, this happens to them. Yeah. No, yeah. The question is saying that he was getting upset at her because you couldn't wake up. As for beating and these things, the interpretation, go back to Sharia, right? Some people, they read the Sharia wrong, right? Like, what is the urf of the Sahaba when it comes to that? What's the khitab Shari regarding this, right? So we go back to the Quran Sunnah, right? But it's not allowed to do that, yeah. But he means like the other part of the hadith, like she used to fast in daytime. That's what he got upset, because that's the huquq issue, right? Yes. So if someone makes a mistake in relation to people's huquq, he has to return it. So when it comes to wada'i, he's not mukallaf in that state because he was forgetful, or he was someone who's mukhti. Allah forgives him, so there is no sin. So sins have to do with one of the five. It's not haram for him, it was a mistake, so it's forgiven. But when it comes to the wada'i side, he has to daman, or he has to repay back, because he harmed someone's property. So the haqq of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the haqq al-ibad is different. So for example, somebody's sleeping, they broke something, or someone accidentally broke something. If they were given permission to use it and they did it by accident, that's different. But if someone just taken it and used it, or was negligent, or something happened and it wasn't authorized, then you pay back and then you're not sinful. So it's different between the wada'i and the taklifi here. Because wada'i means the sabab. The sabab for daman, for paying back or doing warranties, is when you break someone's property without permission or without any reason. But when it comes to the itham, you're not sinful. So that's the difference. So we go back to asbab. The sabab is there, and the ahkam wada'i taklif is haram, wajib, mustahab. So that's the difference. Even a child, one who's not mukallaf, or an animal, runs. And if you have an animal runs and it just destroys someone's property, you have to fix it. The animal's not mukallaf at all, but it's okay. That's two different things. Yeah. Yes. So that's the key, is right. That if sometimes something which is muwassa' can become, for somebody, the time is not so muwassa' for him because there is no other alternatives. For example, if Jum'ah can only be prayed in one area, yes, the Jum'ah time is supposed to be all the way till the Dhuhr time ends, but there's no other Jum'ah in his area to which he can catch in the right time, so he has to pray that Jum'ah. So he has to pray at the earlier time or the one congregation he has. But for example, someone's traveling, the salah becomes more and more spacious. So we have salah time, but now he's doing jam'a muqassar, especially jam'a becomes even more spacious, right, for him, because now he can do between two salah he can gather it. But generally, the muwassi' muwaqqat, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is one sets it for us. So ulama say that here, Allah will determine for us what is spacious, what is not. But once it's determined from the Quran and Sunnah, the person then will or work with it. As long as within the time period, he caught the action in his time. So for example, if somebody prayed Jum'ah, within the frame of Jum'ah is entered, he prayed Jum'ah on time. If someone prayed Salah at the last end of it, he caught the time. One rak'ah he catch before the sun sets, he caught the Asr. But it's very late. It could be sinful, he did it on purpose, or it could be excused if he had work or a reason. But the only one can say he didn't do adah, he did it. So the reason why this is important only is that when the waqt is muwassa' or it's finished, the conversation really is, if it's muwassa', you have the whole time period. If you're missing the time, you have to have udhr. So the people of qada are the people of a'dar. They have excuses. Not anyone can do qada. But if someone is in the time frame, he has a choice. But the choice is earlier time. If I can't, then later times. Because it happens often that you're at work or something and I have to pray at certain times. If you pray the whole time, you caught the salah. But obviously, like we said, sometimes in Jum'ah, we know that you can't be Jum'ah by yourself. You pray with Jama'ah. And that's what the ulama also say. If the Jama'ah in your community is praying at one time, and Salat al-Jama'ah is wajib, right, then you have to pray at that time. There's no choice. So the question sometimes that someone says, that's assuming that there's another Jama'ah, right? Or you're going to play Jama'ah here with the people, what are you doing? That got you late. But imagine there's a Jama'ah happening, whatever time, and I'm going to pray whenever I want. No, I should pray the Jama'ah with them. So that's we can see that sometimes the time is. So we all say pray the earliest time is the origin, except with Dalil. If someone has a reason or an excuse or something that led them to pray later time, as long as in the time, they caught the Salah. But when they miss it, the question then is going to be, do you have udhr or no udhr? That's the real discussion too, because some people, they think, the ulama mentioned many of them, the qada can be done for any time you miss something. But the argument, it goes back to the ahkam al-taklif wada'iyya, we mentioned asbab. Al-hukm yudur ma'a sababi, wujud ma'adama. So you can pray dhuhr before dhuhr time, you can pray dhuhr after dhuhr time. That's qawl sahih. The other group said it's a qada is needed because the dayn is owing on you from the side of Allah. But the problem is that since salah has a sabab, when the sabab is gone, the amal is gone. It's like Hajj, same thing. Hajj has its seasons, and Hajj and its days and its times, and the Hajj after no Hajj. So this is a better way to approach it. But now we understand that the salah has a timing. If somebody is so lazy or somebody is so not practicing, at least we try to pray within the time. Because again, if somebody doesn't pray, what the ulama say, tariq salah is who? Who is tariq salah? The one who doesn't pray. As-salah in its timing, its entirety, or all the time, or even one salah. So those scholars will say they won't miss one salah. Whoever misses one salah in its due time, from the beginning until the end, without an excuse, فهو kafir. That's one opinion. But the reason why that's important is somebody just praying all the time late, it's bad, but it's okay. This is better. Better than the one who doesn't pray. So we can see that sometimes it does depend on the context, but a person should try their best to do it on the earlier time, and it's better for them and better habit. Wallahu a'lam. Yes, brother. Yeah, so some of the ulama talk about praying the salah jama'ah in the masjid before the imam al-ratib prays it. And many ulama say it's not allowed unless a person is in a group of travelers who themselves have a special udhr or excuse, they can pray. Or a person is in a rush. But it's not a good idea to do that. If somebody comes to the masjid where the imam ratib is there, it's better to pray with them. If they can't, then they can pray jama'ah elsewhere or another masjid or somewhere. But if they have to pray and they go, it's allowed. The salah is still valid. But some of the scholars say it's not correct because the imam ratib, this is his authority place. You can't be making the authority without his permission. But the problem we find is sometimes the salah is very late, or is a reason we have to go. And so we pray jama'ah and we leave. And it's not wrong that's not wrong, but it's not something you should be doing, especially if you know the imam is going to come and it's going to be at salah times already fixed. But in musalla there has no imam ratib, then you can pray anytime because nobody's the imam there. But if someone knows that the masjid prays that time, either you can pray anywhere else. Allah wasi'an, you don't have to come to the masjid. Because sometimes it causes a problem too, because the imam doesn't like it. But if you're passing through, that's allowed, and especially if there's a need. That same way, sometimes it happens, right? So it's not wrong like that, but it's better not to do this. Yes. So the Hadith Ibn Mas'ud and Abu Musa al-Ash'ari, I think it was. Yes, Ibn Mas'ud used to break the fast and quickly pray hasten to Asr, Maghrib, and Aisha was told about that, and versus Abu Musa who would break his fast, take a little longer and then pray on Maghrib. So it's based on his ijtihad, but the more closer one Ibn Mas'ud, closer to the Sunnah, and Ibn Mas'ud was also more knowledgeable in that angle, so that is a Sunnah. But yeah, some of these differences, the ulama differ, but it's also not really different. Maybe it's his own practice. He didn't say attribute to the Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. But she asked which one is, you asked which one's closest to Sunnah. He said that one. You misread what he did. Means that when you break your fast, and then quickly go to Maghrib. Like some people, inshallah, they do the whole suhoor, or the iftar first. That's the evidence against it, right? And last one, inshallah.
What about if a lot of time over 60 years old that is it permissible to pray before or after the congregation, or to pray while keeping an eye on all the kids and sometimes pray after the congregation? Or some sisters pray beforehand so that
So for the women, it's okay for them to pray after, before, like this, because Salat al-Fard is Jama'ah is a wajib on Nasran. So it's not wajib on them, so they can pray before, after, they can do what they have to do because it's not wajib on them. Second thing is that, yes, if somebody has something that's delaying them from praying in the Jama'ah, it's permissible for them to delay it. But since it's not wajib on them, they can pray by themselves, they can join the Jama'ah, but somebody's going to stay. And that's a good thing to watch over the kids. Someone might pray the Jama'ah after. So praying Jama'ah after is not a problem, right? But praying before him, that's a problem because we had Abu Musa and Abu Sa'id Khudri Nabi when the man came late, someone was going to give him sadaqah. That shows you can pray a second Jama'ah in the masjid after it's done. But beforehand, that's a problem. Why? Because the Imam is supposed to be the one who has authority. So, for example, I come to the masjid, Salat 3 o'clock, I just start my own Jama'ah. And they say, no, you have to wait for him. But if the situation comes where we have to pray beforehand, and you're praying individually, that's fine. It's about the Jama'ah issue. Praying the Jama'ah, because now you're going ahead of the person's authority. Because the Imam is the one who's responsible. Imam al-Dhaman, he's responsible for the people, but also this is his authority. But in a case like this, it's okay. And even we know that sometimes there's security, and people have to wait and pray after. That's okay. In fact, that's what they're supposed to do, because everyone can't pray because some maslaha might happen. So, for example, all the kids are going to cause chaos and pray Jama'ah. Somebody might pray beforehand and wait with them, or someone pray after. That's good. That's okay. Especially for the women, because not even for the men sometimes, if there's a security, that's allowed, like we see in the haram, right? Wallahu a'lam. Subhanallah, bihamdika, ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk.